When the intercom crackles to life and the doors lock, you think it's just a drill, but sometimes, it's not. That familiar voice announces a lockdown, and you follow the procedure you've practiced a dozen times. You huddle in the corner, away from the windows, your breath held tight in your chest. But as the minutes stretch into an eternity, a cold dread begins to seep into the silence. Today we're diving into 3 terrifying true stories of school lockdowns that turned into real-life nightmares. These aren't just drills. They are harrowing accounts from students and teachers who found themselves trapped in a situation where the threat wasn't just outside the school walls, but sometimes it was already inside with them. So, while liking this video and subscribing to our channel, turn down the lights and prepare yourself for 12 minutes of mind-rattling stories that will make your feeds wet and your palms trembling. Our first story takes us to Cedar Creek, Oregon, a place where life moves at a gentle pace and everyone seems to know everyone else. In this close-knit town, the biggest news is usually the high school football team's latest score, and Friday night games are the highlight of the week. In the fall of 2011, Cedar Creek High was a picture of normalcy, with golden leaves drifting across the campus and students chatting as they made their way to class. Inside a sophomore English class, the students were restless, fidgeting in their seats as they eyed the substitute teacher, Mr. Harrison, who was filling in for their regular instructor. He was a man in his late 40s, with a quiet demeanor and eyes that seemed to carry a weight the students couldn't quite place. There was something about him that felt out of place, though no one could say exactly what. The class was in the middle of a silent reading assignment when the intercom buzzed to life, shattering the calm with its sudden, harsh crackle. "Attention, students and staff. We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill." The announcement echoed through the halls, sending a chill through the classroom. The students looked to Mr. Harrison for guidance, but he was frozen by the window, his knuckles white as he gripped the windowsill, staring out as if searching for something, or someone. Finally, Mr. Harrison turned around, his face pale, slick with sweat, his eyes darting nervously around the room as if calculating his next move. He walked to the classroom door, his hand hovering over the handle, listening intently to the sounds from the hallway, every muscle in his body tense. From the hall, they could hear muffled shouts and the sound of running feet, the chaos outside growing louder with each passing second. "Please, lock the door," a girl in the front row whispered, tears welling in her eyes as fear gripped the room. Mr. Harrison seemed to hear her and, after a moment's hesitation, slowly turned the lock, the click echoing in the silent classroom. Suddenly, a loud banging erupted on their classroom door, making everyone jump in their seats. The students screamed and Mr. Harrison jumped back from the door, his face a mask of terror. The pounding on the door grew more intense, the wood groaning under the force of the blows, as if it might give way at any moment. Mr. Harrison, or David, was muttering to himself, rocking back and forth behind the desk, his composure unraveling in front of the terrified students. "They found me," he whispered, over and over again, his voice barely audible above the chaos outside. Outside, police sirens began to wail, growing closer and closer, their flashing lights painting the school walls in red and blue. "David Jensen, this is the police. We have the school surrounded. Come out with your hands up." The voice boomed through a megaphone, leaving no doubt that the situation was deadly serious. Slowly, David Jensen rose from behind the desk. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I never wanted to bring this here." He looked at the students, regret etched deeply into his face. It turned out that David Jensen was not a teacher. He was a former accountant who had been a key witness in a major federal case, living under a new identity and witness protection, hoping to escape his past. The lockdown had been triggered when another teacher saw one of the men with a weapon in the hallway, recognizing the danger before it was too late. The police had arrived just in time, apprehending the 2 men before they could get to David, ending the ordeal before tragedy could strike. The students of Cedar Creek High were left with the chilling knowledge that for one terrifying morning, their classroom had been the epicenter of a life-or-death manhunt, a secret that would haunt their small town for years to come. For our second story, we travel to Northgate High in rural Pennsylvania, a place where the winters are long and the days seem to stretch on forever. In the winter of 2018, on a particularly bleak afternoon, a soft lockdown was called. The sky was heavy with clouds, and a biting wind rattled the windows. In room 204, a history class taught by Mr. Gable, the students followed the procedure without much fuss. The blinds were drawn, the lights dimmed, and the room fell into an uneasy silence. Among the students was a junior named Liam Miller, a quiet, artistic kid who preferred to keep to himself, often lost in his sketchbook. As the lockdown dragged on, the initial boredom began to morph into a low-grade anxiety. Whispers were exchanged, and the tension in the air grew thicker with every passing minute. An hour passed, then another. This was much longer than any drill they'd ever had, and the students began to wonder if something serious was happening outside their classroom walls. It was during this long, tense wait that something strange happened. Sarah, who was sitting next to Liam, felt a sudden chill, as if a cold draft had swept through the room. She turned to say something to Liam, but he wasn't there. The spot where he had been sitting was empty, his sketchbook left behind on the desk. Panic began to set in for Sarah and Ben. How could someone just disappear from a locked room? The fear was palpable, and the students began to whisper frantically among themselves. Mr. Gable did a quick, silent head count. There were only 27 students. Liam Miller was missing, and no one had seen him leave. The lockdown finally ended after nearly 3 hours. An all clear was given over the intercom, but the sense of dread lingered in the air. When police officers entered room 204, they were met with a scene of utter confusion and fear. Students were crying, and Mr. Gable struggled to explain what had happened. The school was searched from top to bottom, security footage was reviewed, and every possible exit was checked. The footage showed Liam entering Mr. Gable's class that afternoon. It never showed him leaving, not even for a moment. Days turned into weeks. The disappearance of Liam Miller became a local legend, whispered about in the hallways and discussed in hushed tones at dinner tables. It wasn't until nearly 6 months later that a maintenance worker made a gruesome discovery while repairing a loose chalkboard in room 204. In the wall behind the large, built-in chalkboard of room 204, there was a small, hidden cavity, one that no one had noticed before. Inside that dark, narrow space, they found Liam Miller. The truth was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The investigation was reopened, and the horrifying truth was pieced together by detectives determined to solve the mystery. Ben, the student who had been sitting on the other side of Liam, was responsible. He had always seemed a little off, but no one suspected what he was capable of. During the lockdown, Ben saw an opportunity. He had discovered the hidden panel weeks earlier and had kept it a secret from everyone. In a moment of cruel, premeditated malice, he had forced Liam into the tiny opening and slid the panel shut, trapping him inside with no way out. He assumed that once the lockdown was over, he could sneak back and let Liam out, thinking no one would ever know. But the lockdown had dragged on for hours. By the time it was over, police were swarming the school, and Ben panicked, realizing the terrible consequences of his actions. Our final story is perhaps the most tragic, and it comes from Northwood High, a sprawling campus in the heart of a major city, where the ordinary rhythms of school life were shattered in a single afternoon. In the spring of 2016, the school was suddenly placed on a citywide lockdown. Sirens echoed in the distance and the intercom crackled with urgent instructions, sending a wave of anxiety through every classroom and hallway. In the school's music room, a group of 5 friends were in the middle of band practice, their instruments filling the air with sound, when the lockdown was announced. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence. Their teacher, Mr. Jennings, acted quickly. He locked the main door, his hands shaking slightly, and herded the students into the small, soundproof practice booth at the back of the room, hoping it would keep them safe. To pass the time and distract themselves from the fear outside, the friends started telling scary stories, their voices hushed in the dim light. Chloe, always the bravest of the group, decided to bring up a local school legend about a janitor who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. A story whispered about in the halls for generations. As she spoke, a faint, sweet, and slightly musky scent seemed to drift through the small booth, as if conjured by the story itself. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, each wondering if their imaginations were playing tricks on them. Suddenly, they heard a noise. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, so quiet at first that they thought it might be the building settling, but it grew steadily louder. It wasn't coming from the main music room or the hallway outside. The sound seemed impossibly close, as if it was coming from inside the booth with them. making the small space feel even more claustrophobic. The tapping stopped, replaced by a new sound. A low, guttural scraping that sent chills down their spines. The friends huddled together, barely daring to breathe. Noah, his hands trembling, aimed his phone's flashlight at the darkest corner of the booth. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the space behind the largest cello case. There, they saw it. A flicker of movement, something shifting in the darkness. For a moment, no one spoke, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. Suddenly, the cello case toppled over with a loud crash, making everyone jump. The noise echoed in the tiny booth, and in that instant, what was hidden behind it was revealed. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't the missing janitor from the legend. It was a man, very real, and very much alive. He was gaunt, with wild matted hair and clothes that were little more than rags. His eyes darted around the booth, desperate and unhinged. The students were paralyzed with a new kind of fear. This wasn't a supernatural threat, this was a real, physical one, and it was standing just feet away from them in the darkness. The man took a step toward them, raising a rusted metal pipe. Just as he lunged, the door to the practice booth was thrown open with a bang. Mr. Jennings stood in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and horror as he took in the scene before him. He saw the man, saw his terrified students, and reacted instantly, tackling the intruder to the ground with a force he didn't know he had. The man was subdued and arrested by police, who arrived moments later. The truth that emerged in the aftermath was more horrifying than any ghost story the students had ever heard. The man was not the janitor, Frank. He was a homeless individual who had been secretly living in the school's crawl spaces for months, moving unseen through the building after hours. The janitor, Frank, from the old rumor, he hadn't vanished at all. He had simply retired and moved to Florida, living out his days in peace, far from the school and its stories. The horrifying truth was that the lockdown had absolutely nothing to do with the man who was in there with them. The two events were a chilling coincidence, forever linking the legend to a real-life nightmare. The friends had barricaded themselves in what they thought was the safest place in the school, only to discover they had sealed themselves in with a hidden danger. Sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones that turn out to be true. The stories we've heard today are a stark reminder that the procedures designed to keep us safe can sometimes inadvertently trap us with the very dangers we're trying to avoid. For the students in Oregon, their protector was the one being hunted. For the class in Pennsylvania, the threat wasn't outside, but a classmate sitting right beside them. And for the friends in the music room, the safest place in the school became a sealed tomb with a hidden stranger. These events blur the line between safety and peril, showing how quickly a familiar environment can become a landscape of fear. We imagine threats lurking in the hallways, but we rarely consider the possibility that a threat might already be sitting in the room with us. So, I'll leave you with this question. Next time you hear the lockdown alarm, will you wonder what's really happening on the other side of the door? Or will you start to wonder what might be happening on your side? Thank you for watching, and, try to have a good night.